Well, hello, ALBW, wherever you are. And don't you just love that theme music? You realize it's been almost 3 years, but over 2 years since we all saw Gentleman Jack the first time around. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready for the second season now. Thank you very much. Today, we have a couple of very special guests. We're going to be talking about Haugh End. And we're going to be talking about Haugh End with Beverly and Stewart Charnock-Bates. Let's bring them in. Hello there. Hi. How are you? Good to see you. Before we get started, I wanted to make it clear that the building that we're talking about today is not the actual home of William and Eliza Priestley. They lived in a place that was eventually called the Grange over in Lightcliff. And that building actually existed until just a few years ago. I think it was 2015 when it was torn down. But one of the wonderful aspects about the work you do, Beverly and Stewart, is that you're very familiar with these grand old houses and what can happen to them. So tell us a little bit about your background and the nature of your work, will you?
Well, historically, we've been involved with country houses and old buildings really all of our lives. Particularly myself, when I began training to be a surveyor with property, going back too long now, 40 years maybe, I was then involved in country houses such as Haugh End, which is a grade 2 listed building in England. And I learnt my training and how to renovate these properties and my appreciation for them at that time. And my understanding and interest in them really has grown ever since then, almost to the fact that it's more of a hobby now, and because we love it so much.
It's a passion instead of a problem, in other words. So
yes, absolutely. It's grown from work to more of a passion, and it's something that both Beverly and I enjoy together.
And Beverly, what was your background? How did you get involved with this kind of work? Or was it just Stewart's work?
Well, I was actually, I'm from York, and I worked in York and Leeds in the new property sector, developing flats and houses. But of course, when you're from York, you love old property. So it was natural for me to have a passion for old buildings. And I actually got involved in the redevelopment of some old barns and old buildings in York and warehouses. And it went from there, really.
Wonderful. So how did the two of you become aware of Haugh End and Haugh End and it being for sale and et cetera? When did that first catch your eye?
Yeah, there was an article in the Yorkshire Post when it had just come onto the market, and they were only selling the main house with the servants' quarters.
Oops. Sorry. This is actually the Grange, which was the house.
So they were just selling the main house, and we thought, well, we will have to go and have a look at this because it looked beautiful.
Yeah.
And it had never been on the market before because it had been passed through the Priestley families into the Rawson families, and it had never been for sale. And the photographs looked lovely, and we thought, oh, we don't want to miss an opportunity here. Let's go and have a look at it. Right. So we viewed the property, which was lovely. Of course, we fell in love with the place, but it was only the house that was for sale, as we say. Surrounding it, there was land and gardens and other old buildings on the estate. So this was just part of a much larger estate. And our concern was that if we bought the house, there was so much uncertainty with the surrounding properties, which were in a lot of them were in a dilapidated state. So with that uncertainty, we couldn't have just bought the house, but we didn't want to miss out on the house. So we asked the agent if the owners would consider an offer for the whole estate.
Wow. First of all, Steph, could you put that last map back up, please, that older lithograph? The reason I ask you to do this is if the audience takes a close look, when Beverly talks about how this was surrounded by other properties and the history going back to the Rawsons, if you look around here, you can see that they are completely surrounded by Rawson land. So it's not a surprise that eventually this property might wind up with the Rawsons, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about the property as a whole. Steph, if you've got that drone shot of the property, we can talk a little bit about where we were. So in this photograph, Beverly and Stewart, the building that we're actually talking about today is in the upper right-hand corner, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. It's starting down counterclockwise at about 6 o'clock at the bottom. Tell us a little bit about that property and how it grew starting at that spot.
Yes, the old Haugh End cottage. It's one of the oldest properties in Calderdale, and it is actually the oldest houses in Calderdale. And it was built in 1528. And it's got
I'm sorry.
history attached to that. The Archbishop of Canterbury in the 17th century, John Tillotson, was born in that house in 1630, and the front room of the house was decorated to commemorate his birth there. So it's all panelled in a dark oak with religious influences, and there's a lovely stone fireplace with his initials carved out and his birth date as well. It's a fabulous little cottage.
Yeah.
The history is incredible.
Steph, do you have the picture of the inside? There we go. Thank you. Okay, so this is the inside of the cottage.
Yes,
And
you can just see the date on the fireplace there. And
yes,
on the left-hand side, there's his initial J. And it's actually IT because that was the Latin for J.
Oh, okay.
An I, so it's IT.
So
So that was really to commemorate his birth in there.
when do you think that that mantelpiece was built?
Well, John Tillotson died in 1694. So I would imagine it was after his death, following his death.
Right.
Other monuments were placed in London and in St. Peter's Church in Sowerby. So I would think it may coincide with when those monuments were placed.
Right, right. So what kind of shape was Haugh End in general?
Well, when we bought the whole properties, really, it was the main house was completely empty. I think that, although in some respects it's the property is derelict, so you can almost put your own mark on the property because it's although it is derelict, when you actually go inside, it's not in such bad condition. In other words, as you can see in those photographs there, you can see that all of the historic detail has been retained. And I think that's what's particularly attractive and fascinating with the main house, because as you can see there with the original stone flags within the staircase.
Oh, right.
There is the original light on the landing coming out of the plasterwork, and
wow.
there is an original light on the staircase itself. So everything that you can see there will have been placed there in the 1760s.
Wow.
So that plasterwork is in such fabulous order now. So it's almost been like that for 270 years. The room that you're looking at there is actually the dining room. And again, you can see a typical example of beautiful Georgian architecture and original beautiful Georgian architraves. You can see original windows with the original shutters, which would have been placed because that people used the shutters in those days,
right?
Which would again typical of the Georgian period.
So we talked about this briefly the other day, and Beverly, you sent me some information on it. I asked you, Steph, if you could go back to the picture of the staircase, please. So we see that ornamental plaster up there, and I had wondered if there was any relationship between the plaster, this kind of plaster work, and the plaster work that we see at the what's now the Alibi Bar in Halifax, which at this time was actually the Rawson's Bank. And those of you coming to ALBW will have an opportunity to get into the Alibi Bar and see that space as well. But Beverly, you sent me some information about that. Tell me what you found out.
Yes, I mean, the Alibi Somerset House, which is Alibi House, that is attributed to John Carr, the same as Haugh End House. So they are attributed to the same architect, who was the leading architect in the north of England at that time.
Yeah.
And of course, it was very Georgian to have the decorative plasterwork. All the gentry had decorative plasterwork, but the plasterwork at Haugh End was done by the York School of Plasterers, and at Somerset House it was an Italian plasterer. I think John Carr had used elsewhere as well, but he didn't use them at Haugh End.
Okay. I do want to ask you a little bit about your knowledge about the grade 1, 2, et cetera properties. But before I do, a question came up that I meant to ask you the other day. Are you familiar with a place up near Stirling called Cardross House?
No.
Oh, it's a beautiful old property if you get a chance to go up. Yeah. And I'm curious now if that, because it's about the same vintage.
Just a point of interest for you, Pat. Whilst you're talking about the Somerset House and the Rawsons, etc. I mentioned to Beverly the other day, because over the years of me being in the profession as a surveyor in property, I've conducted many property auctions. And the very first auction that I took part in and actually took control of was actually in that particular room in Somerset House.
Oh my gosh, wow.
With the magnificent ceilings and the plasterwork that you've just shown at Haugh End. So that's quite a coincidence, really.
It is. And such spectacular work in both of those places. You did share with me in our previous conversation about what it takes to actually get involved in a house like this in the UK, especially. The buildings are graded in a particular way. Tell us a little bit about that and how it limits what you can do.
Well, effectively, we have 3 listing categories, which is grade 1, grade 2 star, and grade 2. At the Haugh End estate, we have 2 listings there. We have the grade 2 star and grade 2. Grade 2 listed buildings, they are buildings of, I would say, significant interest. That is outside of other properties within England. The grade 2 star, that relates to properties which are of special historic interest. So they are rated above grade 2. And the reason that these buildings are graded is to protect them. It's to ensure that people do not destroy them at all. And in this country, in England, there is legislation in place which protects both the internal and the external of those properties. So if you want to, for example, remove a wall or build an extension or do anything to any of the fabric, either internally or externally, to either a grade 2 star or grade 1, you need to apply to what we call the local authority or the council to get that permission, who then refer that matter onwards to the Historic England and Council of British Archaeology if it's necessary to get them involved as a formal consultee. I think the bulk of these properties became listed in sort of the 1960s. So that's why we refer to a lot of properties where you can, when you look at Anne Lister and you see certain properties that have been lost over the time, they should never have been lost, because if these properties had been listed, they would not have been demolished. And the reason that they are listed is to protect them for the future, for everybody's enjoyment. A lot of people misunderstand the listing and they think that they're negative and they are damaging to the property. But they're quite the opposite. it's almost like a protection for that property to enhance it, and that so when you actually own it, you're almost just living in it and owning it for the next people to come along.
You're the steward of it.
Yeah, you feel really special because you're like looking after something for somebody else who's to come on in the future, it's very, very special.
I want to explain to our, especially our American viewers, that when the Bateses talk about the fabric of the house, they aren't literally talking about fabric in terms of drape or upholstery. The fabric actually means the materials within the house, correct?
Precisely. So if for example, even if you were to, the fabric can be it can even be the plaster on the wall. So if you remove the plaster on the wall, you are actually removing listed fabric. It's it's a fixed part of the property. And going back to the 15, 16 and 1700s, which is when a lot of these buildings were built that we're talking about here, they were all built with lime and they had horsehair within it. It's a very special mixture of plaster, not the plaster that you get today.
Right.
And it's like Historic England. They even try to make Historic England is a body in this country that they are there to preserve these buildings. They even would prefer you to use very special horsehair plaster today. But it's extremely difficult to achieve, and personally, being an animal lover, I'd rather preserve the horse.
I use them both, by the way.
and use different plaster.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to do, Steph, if you could bring up that drone shot again with the Halifax map. There's a couple of things. Just leave this up for a few seconds. First of all, I want to give our viewers a little bit of an idea about the overall location of all these places. As you can see, Shibden Hall is up near the top center. Over to the right is Lydgate, where Anne Walker lived. The original home of the Priestleys, the Grange, which you saw that we talked about having been torn down, was out there near Lydgate as well. Hope Hall and the Shea, those two stars you see in the middle, are Rawson residences in town, or they're in town now. They weren't in town at that point. And then you see Haugh End over here on the left side. But I want to talk about the photograph here because what I was trying to do originally is to walk around the property a little. So starting right about 6 o'clock is the old cottage. That's that one building towards the front near the street that we see, the smaller of those three peaks. So Beverly and Stewart, if we move to the left of the cottage, what's that next set of buildings?
As we progress through the buildings,
yes,
you can see the property next to the small cottage that you have referred to. That was then built with old Haugh End Cottage, which is that small property. So that was all built circa 1500 onwards to 1600. You then progress going from south to north, going through the buildings which are on the left-hand side.
Yes.
You then have a combination of the first buildings you would see are the original weavers' mills come workshops.
Right.
Then continue going north, and then there is the farmhouse. And then as we then revert right, going east, where you can see the sun shining on the buildings and a little blue door.
Yes.
They are the original stables. And then you have the carriage house. And then the buildings just behind the tree that you can see then are the servants' quarters. And then to the right, then you have the main house. To the left of the buildings that I said were the weavers' workshops and the farmhouse. You then have to the left of that, you have the original walled gardens where all the vegetables and the produce would be grown. Hence, that's where the farmhouse was. And behind there also were where all the animals were kept.
It's an amazing property, and to have picked all that up at the same time is really quite stunning. I do have another question for you. In reading the heritage document that you put together, and for our audience, as part of their interest in and purchase of Haugh End, they hired a private consulting firm that put together their entire heritage document that talked about when it was built, each one of the buildings, etc. It brought to mind when I saw the thing about the weavers' workshops. Might these people have been people who were displaying their wares over in the Peace Hall?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the people that would have worked at that property, all they did was they would literally just work for the people who the original house was built for.
Right.
1760s. Then it progressed on to the Rawsons in the 1860s, and it's quite likely that I mean, I've heard local people say this to me, that the servants would live there, they would eat there, they would work there, they would not leave the site, and sometimes that they would not even be paid a wage.
Wow.
So all they would do is just live and eat there. And I suppose if you were to see inside the buildings there, they actually had a very good life. You know, it would seem from what I'm portraying at the moment is though they had a terrible life, because everything is relative, isn't it?
Everything is relative, right? You have to take it in context.
That's right. And when we're talking about the period that we are here, which is in the sort of 1760s to probably the mid 19th century, we're talking here where we had a very wealthy family, and you didn't have middle classes. So you were either one of the very wealthy, or you were very, very much at the bottom.
Or you worked for them, right?
Yeah, there was nothing in the middle. So if you were lucky enough to get a job on what would then have been the Rawson estate from 1850 something onwards, you were very, very fortunate, because you had a bedroom, you had food.
You had food, right?
So what more could you want?
Yeah. It again, everything in context. It's really fascinating. Tell me, did you know who Anne Lister was when you purchased the house?
I'd never heard of Anne Lister. You knew her name, didn't you? Being from Halifax, but we knew nothing about Anne Lister. Really.
I because I'm a Halifax person, Beverly's York. I'd heard of the name Lister, but not in the context of Anne Lister.
Right.
Because there is a Lister Lane, and if you have sort of a famous family name in a particular town, you have things get called after you. Like there was Rawson Street, and there are many Rawson buildings, and there is Lister House, Lister Lane. And when you actually live in a town, sometimes it doesn't give you a second thought.
Right. Right.
You think, well, you don't know why it's called that particular street.
Yeah, it's just part of the history.
There's also a Tillotson Avenue, and nobody would know why.
That's right.
These names are out there, but I have no idea who Anne Lister was.
Oh, how interesting. When did you find out about Anne Lister?
Well, when you walk onto the estate, it just feels like a film set. You just feel as though you've stepped back in time, and it feels so much like a film set. And from day one, I felt that. And my brother came to visit, and he said, oh yeah, it is like a film set. Why don't you contact Screen Yorkshire? Yeah. So I actually contacted Screen Yorkshire, who put me in touch with Creative England. And I mean, I had no idea what a film company may use it for, what sort of period drama. It was obvious it would be period, but there are some areas where you could do horror movies. Believe me, some areas would be perfect for horror movies. Anyway, when Creative England, I sent them about 3 or 4 photographs, and I received a telephone call within an hour saying, it looks fantastic, please may we come and have a look at it tomorrow. Fantastic.
Wow.
They said, Sally Wainwright is writing a period drama about Anne Lister. And we thought, oh, Sally Wainwright, huge respect for Sally Wainwright. She's very well known in the area. And we thought, fantastic, yeah, by all means, we'll talk to you. And so he said, this drama's about Anne Lister. And we had no idea who she was. So we Googled her. And on Googling her, we found a few extracts from these diaries. And they related to Haugh End. And of course, goodness me, she used to visit Haugh End. She'd written about walking around the walking around the rhododendron gardens. And the rhododendrons were still there. And so we thought, wow, who is this lady? And then the next thing we read was a reference to her staying overnight at Haugh End with Mariana Belcombe. So it got more exciting. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. So
the whole
that is the first time that we'd heard of Anne Lister and we learned anything about her.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's like the whole tribe is there.
Yes.
So she had quite a long relationship with Haugh End, starting from when she was a young woman all the way to the end. It covers 3 decades of her life, according to the entries that we were looking at from the diary. Steph, let's take a look at that old lithograph of Haugh End, the one that was done by John Horner. So Anne Lister has another kind of side connection to the property. This lithograph was done by John Horner, and John Horner is the same artist who did the portrait of Anne Lister that we're all familiar with, that hangs in Shibden Hall. And he also painted the Shibden-Dale painting that hangs over the stairway in Shibden Hall. So another connection. So you learned about Gentleman Jack after you had called Screen Yorkshire, let's see. How did Haugh End become the filming location for the show? How quickly did that happen after you talked to them, after they came to see the house?
Well, the man from Creative England then had to contact the production company.
Right.
And it takes time, it takes time to agree and organise everything. So, it was over a few months, really.
Right. And did they, excuse me, I know they used several different parts of the house for different scenes that we've seen in Gentleman Jack. So first of all, we did have in the cottage that stood in for Samuel Washington's home and office.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And here we have Thomas coming to ask for Susanna's hand. Anne Lister talking with Samuel Washington. Of course, then this beautiful shot of the woodwork inside this place, which is amazing. And unfortunately, I don't know that our audience can get quite close up, but there's some amazing carving in those images. And then we also had the shot of them having breakfast together in the dining room. You have that one, Steph? There we go.
Oh, that's the drawing room.
And the drawing room, right?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, no, that's the dining room. Yes.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yes, so these are rooms that Anne Lister has been in herself, the real Anne Lister. So
That's
she
amazing.
would have spent time in all of these rooms.
Right. Just amazing. And let's go back to the first one that you put up there as well, Steph, that we had the dining room. No, that's okay. So that's the drawing room. And you all may remember that painted door in the distance. There she is. When Anne Lister is talking with Eliza Priestley, and there it is in the background. Quite nice.
Yes, that's a hand-painted door It was painted by a member of the Rawson family in about 1913.
Wow.
And we think that it's possibly places where they visited on holiday. There's a lot of images that resemble the Lake District, which of course the people then, they went to the Lake District quite often for holidays.
Right.
So we believe that they are places that they've visited and particularly enjoyed.
Really amazing.
And relating back to the question that you asked me about listed fabric.
Yes.
And what is fabric? It's not a tapestry or a piece of cloth or something. Again, within the listing which is stated about this property, it specifically mentions those doors that you've just seen, which have got oil paintings on, and then they're specifically listed so that you wouldn't want anybody else to remove them. So
yes.
They can remain in that property.
Now, you said something about the fact that some of the windows in the main house had been renovated at one point, or is that
if Steph could probably bring to screen there's two photographs that Steph showed at the very beginning. One of the old house.
The outside of the houses, Steph.
That's it. Super, Steph. Now, if your audience can just view on the left-hand side, which is the black and white photograph, if you can see closely, this photograph is probably possibly 60, 70 years old. In fact, it's maybe older actually. But you can just see the original Georgian windows. And the Georgian windows are where there are actually square beadings which divide up the glass. And you can see that more clearly on the side elevation, which is the gable elevation of the colour photograph, because there is a central window there where you can see how the window is divided up. Right. Well, what happened with the windows in the Victorian period, which was in the late 19th century, the windows were upgraded. So all of the windows, apart from that one on the gable that you can see, where you can see the small square panes of glass, all the windows were removed and they were upgraded at that time, which is a great shame, to be honest, because what Beverly and I are going to do in the short term now is we're going to reinstate the original Georgian windows. Oh my. So that the frontage looks like that Georgian window that you've just seen on the gable.
So they'll all be 6/6s? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that expression. But yeah, it'll be all squared off, and that gable window that you can see is a typical example of how they will all look.
Yes, yeah, interesting. I went through that same decision on the house that I live in now, that which kind of windows to put back in, based on
They're really important.
They're
really important
because it's the external fabric of the property. It's such an important. It improves the aesthetic appearance of the house.
It does indeed. Yeah.
It's just like our face. It's the face of the property, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. There's one other room that I wanted to go back and talk about just real quickly, because of something you told us yesterday about it being the dance floor. Steph, that's it right there. Thanks. Talk to us about this floor a little bit.
Yes, this is the original sprung dance floor, and there would be a layer of foam between the wood and the floorboards beneath, so it's much smoother to dance on. So you have a little bit of give; it's not so hard on the feet. So we're sure they must have had a few small balls and dances in that room. As well as using it as a dining room, of course. And we know that they did have a big long dining table in there.
And interestingly, what would have happened in the Georgian times and progressing into the Victorian times as well, which goes into the period that we're particularly talking about, is that room is the dining room, of course.
Right.
So everybody would have dined there in the evening, the ladies and the gentlemen together. And then at the end of, not when the finished dining, the ladies then would go into the drawing room, which to identify to your readers, it's to your listeners, that's the room where we had Anne Lister sitting with the painted doors in the background.
Ah, okay, yeah.
But, so the ladies would retire to the drawing room, and of course the gentlemen would have a glass of port or a brandy and cigars in the dining room. And then when they'd had their port and their brandy and their cigars, they would then go and join the ladies in the drawing room.
Yeah. Huh.
Which is quite interesting.
Everybody
So the
got
interesting question is, would Anne Lister prefer to talk business with the gentlemen at the dining table or go and join the ladies in the drawing room?
It depends on how attractive the ladies were, I think, for Anne.
Yes.
Other than that, yes, probably business. So were you on set during filming?
Well, that's the perks of owning a filming location. You do get to watch some of the filming. So yes, that we were on set, but we wouldn't want to go into any detail about that.
Right.
The filming company, of course.
Okay, but I do have to ask you if the property is going to appear in season 2. Can you answer that question?
Unfortunately, we wouldn't like to. We just want to protect everything with regard to the production of Gentleman Jack. We don't feel that it's our place to disclose anything at all with regard to that.
We're used to this, by the way, because everybody that comes on that's connected to Gentleman Jack, we always have to ask them about season 2.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I can't tell you. So.
The one thing I would add, though, is that the way that Gentleman Jack did portray the scene in the series where Anne Lister was talking to Anne Walker with the Priestleys and they were having tea in the drawing room. I think that is so typical. That particular shot there, that is so typical of the period. So I think your listeners could certainly imagine that very scene taking place.
Yes.
Because it is so typical of the period, and as you know, Anne Lister did visit Haugh End many times, and so she will have had tea in that particular room, because that's where they will have had the tea like that in the drawing room.
That's amazing.
Not in the dining room, because they would have had Sunday tea or something like that, always in the grand drawing room.
Very nice.
On the little cake stand and the china cups, and
it's very English.
Yeah,
and
they wouldn't have big loungy sofas as we have now. They'd just have like the tiny little sofa and the little chairs, and they'd sit there and chatter and entertain themselves. No TVs, of course.
No large TV.
Just sit and drink tea. And that's the first thing. You still find it's a tradition in England. When you visit anybody's house, the first thing they ask you is, would you like a cup of tea?
Yes.
And so that's still with us. We still do that.
The folks in the UK drink more tea than any group of people I've ever heard of in my life. It comes up everywhere, which is, I'm kind of an iced tea person, but that not the way that it happens over there. So, were you aware, or are you aware now, of the impact that this show has had all over the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
I think we're shocked, really. Shocked.
Yeah, really. Of course, Gentleman Jack has created a huge interest in Anne Lister. And so there's so many people that we've seen that can relate to Anne Lister. They feel a connection with Anne Lister, the story, and we were very sort of quiet at first. We didn't tell anybody we even had the filming location, and we didn't take too much notice to start with. But as time has gone on, and we've realised how many people feel that connection with Anne Lister, and we've seen that she's changing people's lives.
Yes, she is.
And we can see why. I think we can understand, and we talk to the people who know more about this subject than we do, and you know, they're educating us, and they've explained to us just how important it is to them. And I think additionally, from our perspective, it's very important that it's put Halifax as a town on the map.
Indeed.
And I think, you know, indirectly, Anne Lister has done an awful lot for us. She, you know, she's no longer with us, sadly, but at least she's with us now, isn't she? In that we talk about her. Her memory lives on, and thankfully, I think, you know, Sally has done an awful lot to bring that into the media. And yes, of course, it's now worldwide, which we would not have known about, really.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people are, and we talked about this a little before you came on, that over the next day or so, people will be watching you tell the story of Haugh End literally all over the world, which is very exciting. And hopefully we're going to bring a lot of them into Halifax next April when we throw Anne Lister Birthday Week. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Which brings me to the next point, which is your future plans for the house. I know that there's going to be people showing up at your front gate, trying to see the place. And what are you thinking about doing with the house? Is it going to be a B&B? Is it going to be a private residence? Will there be tours? What would you like to say about that?
It will be a private residence, so unfortunately there won't be tours. But we felt that by sharing images and sharing the stories that we know, and about Anne Lister and her visits there, that at least we could give something to the community.
Yes.
Because of course this has all been hidden for so many years. Anne Lister and her story has been hidden from the world.
Yes.
Even people in Halifax didn't know about it, as we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
So it's out there now, and you know, we just want to do just that little bit, what we can, which is sharing the stories, sharing images, because if we didn't do that, nobody would know anything about the house.
Yes.
They wouldn't see the rooms that Anne Lister's walked in, whereas now they can actually have a look at the photographs. They can look at reels that are put on Instagram. They can imagine how her life was when she visited there. So at least that's something that we can do. But unfortunately, we won't be running it as a bed and breakfast or accompanying tours.
But
Right.
I think what we've always thought as a couple is that it's so important that we preserve and we enhance the importance of that house. And you know, many people have asked us, what is that property going to be? Such as, is it going to be flats for apartments? Is it going to be a hotel? Well, absolutely not. I mean, it needs to be kept as it is. We need to enhance the historic detail that's there, to protect it, not remove it. And then it needs to be kept like that for future generations. You know, the skill in looking after a property like that is how you preserve it, not how you destroy it, just because we're going because we're in the 21st century.
Yeah.
You know, we want it to be almost like covered in film, so that people can appreciate it in years to come.
And then the story can continue to be told, can't it? You know,
absolutely.
We'd like to think that in another 100 years, another 200 years, it still looks like that, and the story is still being told to Anne Lister followers in 200 years' time. You know, people will still, the images are out there. Who knows what it will be in 200 years' time, but we believe that restoring that house correctly and leaving it as one house, not converting it into flats and separating, splitting it up, that will remain as one house. So whatever happens in the future, you can still imagine the life that the people there had. And visiting the Priestleys, the Rawsons, and the story will continue.
But there is a bit of good news. a bit of good news, which is that there may not be the tours. You may not be able to come inside to see it because obviously it will be our home.
Yes.
But there is now an opening in the trees, which there wasn't before.
Right.
On the actual country lane itself. So, which many people now travel by and they stop. And the grand house that you can see in the images shown by Steph earlier, you can see the grand house standing there. You can see the servants' quarters. You can see the stables and the carriage house. And you can see it there in its glory.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So you can just imagine how Anne would have visited going back all those years ago.
Yeah, and there's a private driveway up which is private and it's access only for the residents, and there are residents there. So people wouldn't be able to walk on there, but walking along Haugh End Lane, you can see it, and it is visible, and the other properties are visible, and the hillside really hasn't changed much from when Anne used to arrive in the carriage or walking on foot. It's very green, it's very beautiful. And so walk along there and imagine what she saw, what it was like, and so much is still very much the same. So
it's really wonderful.
It could be quite enjoyable. I know David Glover does some historical walks
Yes.
during the summer, and he knows so much about the history. So he's a good chap to walk.
Yeah, that's David Glover was really one of my very first introductions to Halifax. I managed to find his name and hire him as a guide on my first trip because I couldn't even find a guide. It was, it was not your typical, go to an app and find some kind of tour in Halifax at that time. So
things have changed a lot, haven't they? I don't think it was particularly thought of as an historic town. People didn't seem to appreciate what was here, and it's got so much to offer. And we want everybody to come to Halifax and say how wonderful it is. There's so much to offer. As you know, when you've done your tours, you've seen all these fabulous buildings, and particularly when you're going around the old buildings and the spots where Anne Lister has been, you can appreciate how fantastic it is. So we welcome everybody with open arms to Halifax.
And there's so much of it left. That's what's so interesting. And when our guests come in April and they take a couple of the walking tours that we're going to have, they'll be stunned at how much is still there. That was really part of Anne's life. Not downtown, because downtown is really far more Victorian in nature. A lot of that was torn down. But on the outskirts, there's tons of stuff. So it's exciting. Well, we're getting very close to the end, and I've got a few questions here that I want to ask you about. So let's see what we've got on the magic Q&A. This one is from Jen Fitzpatrick. Oh, wow, it's a good question. How do you install a heating system without disturbing the original structure and integrity of the house?
Very good question.
That is a good question. Right, I think we need to ask a plumber. No, the key to this is, of course, that normally if you see in a house, you'll see pipes running along the top of skirting boards.
Right.
And it's particularly difficult when you think about the first floor, because it depends about which direction the joists are facing.
Of course.
You have to get pipe work out, and this is particularly challenging. I'm indirectly answering her question, but it's more to do with such as toilets and bathrooms and things, because you've got to think about pipes.
Right.
So you can't do with the pipe work coming down the front of a Grade 2-star listed building. So you need to direct all the pipe work in the direction of where the floor joists are actually heading.
Right.
And you actually need to get take the floorboards up and then basically follow the direction of the joist, the floor joist. And so that's what you would do with regards to the installation of bathrooms. But the same thing applies really to the heating system as well, because you don't want any pipe work showing. So you have to have it hidden as far as possible under floors. You can also bring a skirting board forward so that the skirting board isn't against the wall. So you can bring skirting boards forward, and then the pipework can be hidden behind.
So in other words, working with this grade 2 star listed house, it isn't that you can't do anything to it. It's just how it's done, and that the fabric is replaced in its original position.
That's correct. You need. I think the great thing about the grade 2 star listing is that you need to think outside the box. You need to box clever. You can't just go thinking, oh, just put a skirting board on a wall. You need to think, right, how are we going to do that? Visually, how will it appear?
Right.
And the same questions arise with electrics and anything like that, because if any of your listeners now look at their houses and think, apply the logic there between how would they do this if they were in a listed building, because you don't want things like, you don't want wires showing.
No.
You don't want anything like this showing, because it wouldn't be like that in the Georgian and Victorian times. So we've got to keep it looking exactly as it is.
What a challenge.
I hope that's a question.
Okay, now this is also a good question, because I don't think we really hit this one. This is from Patricia Book. How has the property been used over the last few decades? It's been in the Rawson family, correct?
Descendants of the Rawsons, yes.
Yeah.
So as far as we understand, the lady that lived there, she lived there in the family home on her own, and then when she's passed, we believe that it's been empty, vacant for quite some time before we viewed it. So it has literally been a family home.
Wow, it's amazing. That is one of the things that's so wonderful about the care with which your country takes of its grand old homes. That kind of care is taken of them. Of course, you do lose one now and then, but it's really wonderful. Okay, this is from Alison Kirschgasser. Was the furniture and artwork used in the filming brought in by the production company?
Yes, I think that at the end of the day, I think the reason that the whole estate was particularly attractive to the filming company was that all the buildings were virtually empty, so they had a blank canvas with which to work with. If you can imagine filming companies going into houses now, or if they go into a country house and it's lived in as a home, and it's got loads of antique furniture in, it's very, very difficult for them, very difficult indeed.
Right.
So I think when they saw Haugh End, for a variety of reasons, and the associated buildings, they were empty, so they could literally turn up with all their furniture and just move it in.
Right. They didn't have to worry about that. But this ties in with the next question, which is also from Patricia Book. Will serving as a filming location provide any support to your work in restoring the property? So I think what she's getting at is, at least here in the States, if they take your home as a filming location, it may be repainted. There may be repairs done to it, etc., so that it fits with what they're trying to do. Are they doing anything within the property in terms of paint or plaster work or that kind of thing, or they're just using it exactly how they found it?
Well, when we let it as a film location, it needs to be decorated to how they want it. But there's such a lot of work, and it's serious work. It looks fabulous in the images, but there is such a lot of serious work that it wouldn't be possible for any of that to be done.
You may recall on the images that you've shown today that in the dining room with Gentleman Jack, it was pink.
Yes.
As you can see now.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's painted white.
Right. Oh, okay. So they just came back in and gave you a blank canvas.
Yeah. So I think because they said to us, well, how would you like us to leave it? And we said, well, please just leave it as it is, and then it's white and it's bright and clean. So that really answers that question.
That's really wonderful. Well, we have run out of time. I haven't run out of interest. As I told you guys the other day, I could sit here and talk to you for another couple hours, but I want to thank you for coming on with us today. And I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing with this grand old home.
Our pleasure.
I look forward to seeing it, even from the street. I look forward to seeing it. So
you're very welcome, Pat.
Yes. So with that, thank you, Beverly and Stewart, and appreciate you coming on. You are free to go.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll talk soon. Thank you. And so that was really wonderful. And it really is quite a project that they've taken on. The history of this house is truly amazing. Once again, as always, I want to thank my team, Steph, Kat, and Cheryl back there behind the screen. A couple of announcements. There will be no ALBW Live in June. I'm going to take a little vacation. And thank God that we can finally do some of that stuff, right? But we'll be back in July. We've got several things coming up, and we're also hard at work on ALBW. And hopefully, either in July or August, we're going to have another episode where we're talking about the actual events that you'll be able to take part in ALBW. And I got to tell you, we're really excited about it. It's really quite something, and I think you'll be really pleased. So in the meantime, as always, for those of you who still have a mask rule in your countries, please wear it. And also, for those of you who have the opportunity to get a vaccination, please, please, please get the shot. It's for the community as much as it is for you, as much for you. So we've got this thing on the run in certain places. Let's make sure that we beat it to the finish line. I will see you soon. Enjoy June and take good care.